Well, hi everyone, welcome to today's blog, and we continue this theme of looking at the parables that Jesus tells about wedding banquets and the whole idea of banquets in general as a way of looking at the kingdom. And today's parable comes from Luke chapter 14, just before one of the great stories of Jesus about the wedding banquet. But this story, just to put it in context, because we won't be able to read all of it today, Jesus has gone to one of the prominent Pharisees' houses and has been invited there to dinner amongst lots of other probably invited guests. There have probably been about 10 to 20 of them at a quite a formal occasion. There was quite an elaborate code, both in Judaism and also within the whole Roman world at the same time, about how you went about these sorts of things. And yet this is what Jesus has to say when he notices people are sort of working out exactly where they fit into this rather elaborate hierarchy. From verse 7 in chapter 14 it says, "When Jesus noticed how the guests picked the places of honour at the table, he told them this parable. When someone invites you to a wedding feast, do not take the place of honour, for a person more distinguished than you may have been invited. And if so, the host who invited both of you will come and say to you, 'Give this person your seat.' Well, then, humiliated, you will have to take the least important place. But when you are invited, take the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he will say to you, 'Friend, move up to a better place.' Then you will be honoured in the presence of all the other guests. For all those who are exalted will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted." Now, I'm not someone who's been invited to lots of formal dinners, not necessarily my particular scene, but I do remember one time I was invited by a very dear friend of mine who happened to be a member of the House of Lords to go and have lunch with him up in London. I was in London studying at the time as a student, one day a month, and I went over to meet Tim, and he very kindly took me to lunch in the restaurant of the House of Lords and the House of Commons. And there, sat at the next table, was someone who was a former Prime Minister, a lady called Margaret Thatcher. Some of you may know her, and some of you may have heard about her. She was quite a reputation in her day. And around her at the table were both other advisors and aides, and they were basically agreeing with everything she said and laughing and joking, and if I'm honest, making quite a scene. And reading this parable, of course, it makes you think, well, were they actually wanting themselves to be noticed, to be part of the in crowd? And that can happen in any situation. And it's this sort of thing that Jesus is particularly speaking into. Why is he doing so? Well, the reason is that whether it be a celebrity, or whether it be a pop star or a football star or a prime minister, the danger is that we see them simply as a meal ticket to our social climbing. And indeed, maybe they see those aides and those around them as simply those who hang on to their coattails as they themselves are clamouring for power. And Jesus, throughout his ministry, challenged all this, and it was like a hot knife trying to cut through butter, because he sees far more than simply our clamour for power within each of us. He sees who we really are. He sees our joys, our loves, our fears, our anxieties. I personally find such situations really difficult. I always get very tongue-tied, which is strange, being someone who's a vicar and talks a lot. But at the same time, he sees what's in you and he sees what's in me. And whether we're particularly naturally at ease in such an environment, or whether we find it absolutely cringeworthy and most difficult, he doesn't base his value of who we are on simply that. Indeed, he sees much deeper into who we are and who we can become. And I love Jesus for that. And by contrast, I had a sort of the opposite experience, really. I was once invited to a wedding banquet of a couple who got married in one of our local churches. And by accident, I sat at the wrong table. I sat on a table with my name, but it was actually for somebody else. And the people at that table came from Kerala in India, and they sort of were a little bit sort of, they didn't say, well, who are you or why you're sitting, they just welcomed me. And then over the course of the meal, I got to know them, and they were absolutely delightful. And what I found out halfway through at the sort of the break time, half time between the main course and dessert, that I was supposed to have been sat on a completely different table with other people. And then of course the challenge was, do I move up to this higher table, or do I stay with the people I was meant to, I had actually inadvertently sat with? I chose the latter, and I am very thankful that I did, not because the other people weren't very nice too, but because it's taught me, as I reflect on this parable, people are people wherever you meet them and in whatever situation, and that's how Jesus wants us to see one another and see the world. We may or may not go to very posh meals very often, but actually it's about the rest of life too. How do we see the other person, and how do we believe